With great excitement, I introduce you to Northwood University, a truly exceptional institution in American higher education. Since 1959, this private, accredited university has been a vibrant bastion of free thought and enterprise, standing out among the thousands of other schools in the U.S. Known as America's Free Enterprise University, Northwood is dedicated to nurturing the next generation of leaders who drive global social and economic progress. At the heart of Northwood lies the Northwood idea, a philosophy that celebrates individual freedom, responsibility, and the importance of moral law and free enterprise. This entrepreneurial spirit is evident in that 1/3 of Northwood alumni own businesses. Northwood is more than an institution. It's a movement that empowers students to think critically and champion liberty. It is a rare gem in today's academic world. If you're passionate about supporting a university that values intellectual growth and free enterprise, or to learn more about its academic programs, visit northwood.edu.
Hi, everybody. This is Saad for the Saad Truth. Today, I'm very honored for a specific reason, because this lovely individual, it's 6 o'clock in the morning there, and she's willing to wake up this early to come speak to humble me. Erin Molan, how you doing?
Oh, Gad, it's so lovely to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. I did breakfast radio for 4 years, so 6 a.m. is nothing, my friend. I would get up earlier for you, I promise, but I used to have to set my alarm for 4 a.m. for over 4 years. So it's an honor to be with you. I'm such a big fan, so thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. I first heard of you because people would send me, I mean, usually they were pro-Israel supporters, and they would just endlessly send me links to this Australian firecracker, and that's how originally we connected. But let's take it back. I want to make sure that I get the key points in your bio correctly. You used to be a TV personality on a rugby channel or something of that sort, right? I guess. So by rugby, we don't mean Australian rules football. We mean traditional rugby, correct?
So rugby league, not even rugby. So we've got four codes in Australia that are pretty big. So AFL, rugby union, rugby league, and then football and soccer. We call it soccer here. And rugby league is, I say, the biggest, but people where I am now, which is in Melbourne, like to argue that AFL is much bigger. It depends on where you live in Australia. But I started out hosting rugby league. So I was the first woman to host the Footy Show, which was like a kind of weekly rugby league program. Then moved into hosting Friday Night Footy, doing games. And yeah, from there, I kind of evolved into where I am now. My dad was actually in the army for many years, and so we moved around. And one of the probably most impactful postings that he had was in Indonesia, in Jakarta, during 1998 when the Suharto regime fell. And I would have been 14 or 15 years old at the time, but I remember even quite young, being so astonished by watching a country stand up and fight for democracy. He was a ruler that was in power for 30 years. His children owned every major piece of infrastructure. And then the country decided that they'd had enough and they wanted democracy, freedom, fairness, opportunity. And they hit the streets. A lot of people died. They gave their lives. So watching that as a young person really instilled in me this sense of social justice and this sense of fighting for what's right and being willing to give your life for that. And I obviously had dad who was in the army as well. So I think even though I did sport for many years, hosted the Australian Open, hosted tennis, lots of different things, the passion for me was always national security, politics, foreign affairs, much more in that space. If I can put it in a succinct way, I got sick of talking about men's groins at 11 p.m. on a Friday night as I got older. I thought there's got to be more to life than this, as much as I so now I found it.
Now you found it. I mean, I think you're being modest about your dad. He wasn't just in the army, he was a general, was he not?
He was a major general, absolutely, in the Australian Army. He was incredible. At 17 years old, he got in a train by himself from Melbourne to Canberra to Duntroon, and it was his dream job. He graduated from Duntroon, which is a staff college, officer college here in Australia, the year that the Vietnam War ended, actually. So he didn't go to Vietnam, but he then had the most incredible career where he he was the most active Australian general / officer in many, many years, since probably the end of World War II, end of Vietnam. He ran the war in Iraq for a year, actually, as part of the coalition operation. So he's chief of staff there. So he worked with some incredible people, people that I'm still in contact today, General Petraeus, lots of different generals there, and ran that war and ran their first democratic election as well in 30 years. So it was his job to do all the logistics behind that, to protect all the Iraqi people who, for the first time, as I said, in decades, were lining up to vote and have their say, given how tumultuous their lives have been thus far. So he cared deeply. He had a moral compass like no other. And I didn't really understand that, Gard, for many years, in terms of just what that meant or how difficult it was to maintain that. But he had a great sense of humor. He then became an Australian senator as well. And this is my humble brag, because it's not so much, it's not me, it's him. But he's the most individually voted for politician in Australian history. And it just goes to show he was, you look at so many politicians who have been from day dot, university, politics, straight into politics, no real life experience. I've never had real jobs. And a lot of them care deeply, and good on them. They do wonderful jobs. A lot of them don't, but some of them do. But I think you just can't replace someone who's lived in the real world and done real things going into politics and helping shape policy and shape the future of a nation, particularly when it comes to national security. So his loss last year was, I say it's a privilege to still feel this sick, guttural pain, and I do every day. We're coming up to 2 years now. But I think what a privilege that it still hurts so much, because if it didn't hurt as much, he wouldn't have been so amazing. So I see it as often an honor. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I saw the tweet that you put out, and I think I responded to it. And it actually, I mean, in Arabic, there's an expression where you don't compare yourself to someone who's deceased, because that way, it's like a curse. But seeing the glowing love you had for him reminded me of my own relationship with my daughter, who just turned 15. A few years ago, I was giving a plenary lecture for Hillsdale College. I don't know if you know them. Have you heard of Hillsdale College?
Yes.
Yeah, Hillsdale College is sort of one of these real beautiful little gems of, there are 4,000 universities in the United States, but they don't accept any funding from the government, so they can be truly free. So they, very much classical liberal tradition, somewhat conservative values and so on. So they had invited me down to Naples, Florida to speak, and I had discussed the parasitic mind and so on. And at the end of my talk, my whole family was there. At the end of my talk, it was a pretty sizable crowd. And as I walked down from the podium, my daughter comes and hugs me and just whispers in my ear, "I'm so proud of you, Dad." And I swear to God, and she was about 12 at the time. That probably was a bigger accolade for me, that my 12-year-old daughter would say, "I'm so proud of you, Dad," than all of the other accolades combined. So I really do appreciate the love that you exhibit for your dad.
That's really beautiful. And I remember when I realized that, not that Dad was special in any way that is elitist or wanky or anything like that, but when I realized just how special he was in terms of what he stood for and who he was, which I know that your daughter would relate to with me, with what you do, because it's not easy. And he used to always say, actually, would do a lot of television, a lot of speaking, a lot of different things. And he would joke that the saddest day of his life, and you look at all that he'd achieved in conflict in Australia, in politics, everything else, there came a moment when I started to make my own name in television, and in a very different field, obviously in sport. But he said he went from being, Major General Jim Molan, Senator Jim Molan, to Erin Molan's dad. But I know he also was immensely proud of that. And I miss him so much, and I'm so sad that I can't talk to him now, because sometimes I feel like I need him now more than I ever have. But I'm not overly spiritual, I don't think, but I hope that he's still with me in some way, shape or form. And I feel him sometimes. I'd like to feel him here a lot more, but I'm hoping that will come as more time passes.
That's beautiful. May he rest in peace, and his legacy will live on through just something as simple as this conversation, right? He is alive right now. We're speaking about him, right?
It's Gad, that they say people die twice, once when they take their final breath, and the second time when you stop saying their name. And this is, I made a promise to Dad that he would never die twice under my watch. So I will speak about him. I go at airport yesterday, people come up and say, your dad was amazing. And then they say, oh, I'm so sorry to bring him up. That must upset you. Oh my gosh, no, the opposite. I say, you know, Dad had a healthy ego. He loved people talking about him and liking him, as his daughter does a little bit as well. So I say, bring it on, bring it
That's
on.
beautiful. So would it be fair to say, as I'm sitting here and sort of looking at you for long, I mean, you were kind enough to invite me on your show, but it was only, I think, a 6-minute hit. So I didn't get to, I'm focusing on what I have to say and so on. You're kind of reminding me, I hope it's not an insult to say this. Are you the Australian Megyn Kelly?
Look, it's been said to me a few times, and it's an incredible honor. My gosh, I take that every single day of the week. I'm different though in I don't feel like I fit into, and you're probably very similar when I look into you and what you believe and what you feel and what you stand for. Just like she is as well. I think in some ways I'm quite socially progressive. In other ways, I'm very conservative when it comes to the economy, national security. I've just, and I'll be honest with you, I've felt the way that I felt for a very long time, but I didn't quite have the courage to express it until very recently, very recently. And I don't know what the catalyst for that was. It wasn't when Dad died. That was a couple of years ago. And even then I still had this fear because I worked in so many different worlds, and I worked in breakfast radio where my audience were mums driving to school, and it was a comedy show. So we just laughed and we talked about Taylor Swift and, all different things that were fun, but not really of substance when you look at the world today and the things that really matter, but great fun. But it's only in the last 6 months that I've really started to find my voice. And I look at women like her, and I think it's similar, right? I think you get to a stage where you're old enough, you're ugly enough, you're wise enough, you care much, much less what people think, but you care much, much more what the right people think.
Right.
So I care much less now about people who are nasty, who don't contribute a thing. Could not care less. If I love you or you pay me, I care deeply what you think. That's it. Anyone else couldn't care less. But I care much more deeply about what people who almost can't articulate what they think, or my daughter, my 6-year-old, what she needs from me is to fight for the kind of world that I want her to exist in when she's older. So it's funny, you care less in some ways, but you care deeply more in other ways. And then this ability to speak without fear has taken over me in a way that has surprised me in some circumstances as well. But it's also a great privilege, I think, to have a platform, and you would know that as well in your world. And I think if you have a platform, I couldn't look myself in the mirror if I used the platform that I had and I said things that either I didn't believe or that weren't genuine or that were trying to placate different audiences, different people, or if I was trying to have everyone like me. That's one of the greatest things Dad ever did. Was there was a protest at a university when he came home from Iraq, and they were calling him a war criminal. And I was so upset by it. I was like, how, my dad, this is my dad, he's so brave. He saved so many lives, millions of lives, in East Timor, in Iraq. He's incredible. These people are calling him a war criminal. And about 2 weeks later, I walk into his office at home and it's laminated on the wall, this poster calling him a war criminal. And he said, Erin, you haven't made it till they protest at university calling you a war criminal. And you know why? Because I fought for their right to do that. The irony, huh? And that was it. Could not care. He was so self-assured, and he knew beyond any doubt that every decision he made was in the best interest of whoever he was trying to protect. He was so noble that he did not care less because he had no doubt.
Wow. Well, I'm glad that I was the first to educate the great Erin about what it means to be a honey badger. I was surprised that you didn't know. I mean, I thought that was sort of a universal archetype. So now you clearly understand the great compliment that it is. Yes?
Absolutely. So the issue is, Gad, that here in Australia, we have a honey badger who was a rugby union player, and he became the honey badger, and he was this real ochre Australian who had this outback humor. And then he ended up doing the Bachelor series as a celebrity bachelor. His name's Nick Cummins. And at the end, and believe you me, I've matured since watching The Bachelor. I promise you, I'm really mature and sophisticated now. But back in the day, 10 years ago, whenever I used to watch it, He had these two beautiful women at the end. He didn't choose one of them, and both their hearts were broken. So then in my mind, the Honeybadger became this evil person who wouldn't choose a woman to marry. So now I'm
I see.
glad it's been redefined in my mind. So I'll take it.
Beautiful. Okay, so I want to talk a bit about, I mean, I have an Australian person, so I have a deep love for Australia for several reasons. Let's begin with reason one and go back to memory lane to landing in Sydney, 2001. It's my first sabbatical leave. So I'm taking 7 weeks in to tour Australia and New Zealand, 2 weeks New Zealand, 5 weeks Australia. My wife and I, we didn't have children then. We land in Sydney. Of course, it's a very long trip from Montreal. We're in King's Cross, which I hear is a pretty shady area. Is that right? We had no.
Well, go through phases, but yeah, there's a lot of gang type stuff back in the day and strippers.
So
Gangs and
that's what I saw. I didn't feel very, threatened. I just felt like it was slightly seedy. But as we walked around, I landed in this kind of cafe, neighborhood cafe, where I had the first orgasmic flat white, and I still have not recovered. I still have not been able to find that hit. And so my wife and I will often talk about, do you think we could ever replicate that first time? So
oh
you
God.
clearly know what I'm talking about.
Tell you now, Gad, you were already a king here in many circles, but you've just widened that significantly because most people know that Australian coffee is the best in the world, but the majority of foreigners will never admit it. So thank you. That was incredible.
100%. And I mean, I'm from Montreal. We've got, of course, in the Middle East, a coffee tradition. So I'm a coffee snob, and I've never experienced. Now, not every place I went in Australia, the coffee was as good, but certainly that first one, absolute top World Cup. It's the Lionel Messi of coffee. So you could put that on a
Oh my,
laminated thing.
well, what's the name? I mean, this could launch them into
Can
the
I tell you
sphere.
something? I've often fantasized about whether I can go back to that spot and they're still open. Now, this is 2001, so it's 23 years ago. The likelihood of a cafe being open for that long is probably remote, but
Particularly with our local government there. That would also be very hard for them to have stayed open for that long.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Well, there, if by fluke they know who they are, please send me an email. But it was really sort of off. It wasn't on the main street of, the King's Cross. It was an off street, sort of the bottom of a residential building, and it was just magical. All right, let's keep going. So
Can I just make the point,
Please.
Gad, that I've heard many men start a line toward me, and it's maybe getting a little bit less as I get older, but I've often fantasized about, but none of them have ever finished it with finding that coffee shop again. So I just want to let you know, thank you.
I have to be careful. I'm a married man, so I've got to do the whole
With a
professorial.
beautiful life. Very lucky.
Well, thank you. All right, so first I begin with Sydney. Sydney was absolutely outrageous because it reminded me of Southern California, but just with people with weird accents. Does that make sense? Yes?
Makes total sense. I think you've nailed it.
There you
Yes.
go. Then I go to Melbourne, and I had heard in the past that Melbourne is akin to Montreal. There's been so I live in Montreal, so a lot more sort of cultured and so on. So loved Melbourne. Even won 20 Australian dollars in the Melbourne casino on the river or whatever it's called. And I told my wife, if we win $20, we stop. So that way we paid for the all you can eat buffet. So that was that. Then we went to, is it Phillips Bay?
Yes, correct. Yes. Beautiful.
Then we hit the Great Ocean Road.
Road. I still haven't done that.
Ever in your life?
Never. I
How's
need
that?
to get out more. I'm actually quite a non-social. I get social awkwardness and anxiety, so I just stay home generally for the most part. But I need to hit the Great Ocean Road.
Yeah,
Clearly.
that's right. Or you will find the right people to invite me over and pay me the right remuneration, and then we'll go do it together.
Do you know what? That is a great point. And for everyone listening here, if you want to bring this man over, come on.
There you
Come
go.
on.
There you go. Here's me being a Jew again. Look, Jews just run after the money. That's all we care about. I'm just Jewing it. All right, let's go on. Then after that, Adelaide. It's slightly bit more, not antiseptic, gorgeous, but a bit more sort of planned, rectangular, so on. Then we went to Kangaroo Island,
Oh, yes.
then Brisbane, Surfers Paradise, and so on. And now I come to arguably the scariest part. We ended up in Cairns, and I've often joked that if I were hired to be the tourism board director of Cairns, here's what the slogan would be: come visit us in Cairns, where there's 1,000 ways for you to die. So,
I'd
you
say
ready?
you're being there.
Go.
You're being only 1,000. Wow, you must have gone and no. Look, it's I've only been to Cairns twice, and once was we took a group of radio listeners, and look, it is stunningly beautiful in some parts, in other parts not so much, which is probably reminiscent of most places in the world. But how did you nearly die? This is a great
So I'm gonna
story.
get ready. You ready? I'm gonna try to list them
I'm
off the top
ready.
of my head. I think it was like sort of dusk. As we get there was a level 1, I guess you guys call it cyclone or typhoon, whichever, a hurricane
Oh,
basically. So there was
yeah.
that. So we had to be careful. Second, so that's number 1, death. Number 2, be careful. Don't walk here or there, because there are all sort of rowdy indigenous guys that will pick fights with you. Number 2. Number 3, be careful. Don't get stung by mosquitoes, which is not a difficult thing for me to try to avoid, because I have a huge mosquito phobia, because they have Ross River fever. Number 3. Number 4, don't go into any of these gorgeous beaches, because the box jellyfish will kill you. Number 5, there is a spillover from the rivers, so the salties, the salt crocodiles, will come on the beach. Be very careful. They'll kill you. And then to end it all, there was about 4 different types of man-eating sharks lurking if you actually wanted to jump in the water and not be killed by the box jellyfish. So death was everywhere, Erin.
No, it sounds like a typical Australian town with the nature and the wildlife, absolutely. But isn't it exciting? Wouldn't it be so boring if you went to a place, I don't know, like Hawaii, where you just lay on the beach and there was nothing trying to kill you? I mean, live a little, Gad. Come on. You know, live on
Very
the edge.
true.
You're an adventurer.
Very true. All right. So I missed probably Perth. Have
Yeah,
you
and
been?
Canberra. Don't people in Australia are so mean to Canberra? We're our own people. I was born there. They say it's boring. Oh, it's got Parliament House. They hate it. It's politics, blah, blah, blah. It is one of the most incredible places in the world. It is one of the
Really?
most aesthetically beautiful places. And I'm obviously a little bit biased, as I consider it home. But it's just Canberra in autumn. That's when you need to go driving down some of those streets and the lake, and it's beautiful. So Canberra next time. It doesn't usually top the list of kind of must-see places, but it should.
Oh, wow. So that's the capital, correct?
Capital, yes, that's
So
right.
it's kind of like our Ottawa.
Yes, yeah, and it's got the War Memorial as well, which I guess just given Dad and my kind of passion in that space, it's the most incredible place where you just, I mean, not enough young people do it today in so many ways, and I'm sure you would agree with this in terms of actually understanding history.
Sure.
So that when you want to decide that you care deeply about something, when you want to advocate for something, when you want to protest, you know, I feel like protesting is just back in the day, protesting was such a noble thing because people understood the cause. People protested for things that were genuine and legitimate, and they fought because they understood. Nowadays, I see so many people protesting for hate and terror and evil, and because most of them don't understand. Some of them absolutely understand, and their intentions are awful, but a lot of people just don't understand. So I feel like going to places like that, going to places where you actually learn and understand history and understand, and I've mentioned you probably 50 times since we did our interview. Even last night, I was at an event in Melbourne at a fundraiser, because what I'd struggled with so much since speaking out in this space, and so many young people say, don't you care about all the kids dying in Gaza? Don't you? I read a headline about something bad happening to a child and I am in tears. I am the most empathetic, emotional person. You know, my daughter has a blocked nose and I feel sad because she might be uncomfortable. Because I care so much is why I stand so strongly against terror, against the people causing that death. And I said to you, how can these people who wave the flags of Hamas legitimately believe that they are helping children? And you said to me about this concept of suicidal empathy, about the book you're currently writing. And it's blown my mind. It's comforted me in so many ways because I go, okay, now I get it. Because people, yeah, so many people seem so just so confused in so many ways. But when you put it that way, I went, that's it, you've nailed it. And that is one of the greatest issues that we as a society face, is misplaced empathy. Because I like to believe most people are inherently good.
Exactly.
So if they're inherently good, why are they supporting terror? And you're right, you've nailed it there. So I
Oh,
think
thank you.
education, coming back to the War Memorial, is kids understanding, so therefore they can put their energy and their passion and their fight into things that are noble. And doesn't mean it has to be things I agree with, but things they understand and things that are noble.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning the book, because I'm feverishly writing it, even at a faster pace than I would typically do so, because it has really gone unbelievably viral, and people don't even, so people are sending me tons of emails saying, well, how come I can't order it? Well, I haven't finished writing it yet, but that's kind of putting, sorry?
That's my fault for saying it was done in my new
Maybe you're the
but I
cause.
corrected it.
No, but thank you. Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to try to have a first draft ready way ahead of schedule, probably in the next few months, but we'll see. Fingers crossed. How is it, if you were to look at the ratio of people who come up to you, very complimentary and positive and supportive, versus the ones who don't? Is the ratio? I'd like to think 99-1, or am I being too optimistic?
No, do you know what? You've absolutely nailed it again, which doesn't surprise me. But this isn't new to me, right? People disliking me. I feel like, if everyone likes you, you're not doing things passionately enough. You're not standing up for what's right. You're not making enough of a difference. And when I started in football as the first woman to do a fair few different jobs, the people that came out and were so offended by my mere existence were just, online it felt like so many, be one Dickweed 101 on Twitter thinks you need to go back to the kitchen. Oh, thanks, Dickweed. Yeah, really clever insult there. But in real life, I think one person in 10 years said something mean to me, and I can't even remember. It was in a pub, and I was like, whatever. Every other person would come up to me and say, you are amazing. You're leading the way for women. You're incredible, etc., etc. And it's the same in this space. And this is what gives me hope, that the vast majority of people understand what's at play here. They don't find it complex. There is no blurry line in terms of, do you support terror or do you support not terror? It is so simple. And I think most people believe that. And look, where I live in Sydney, it's daily, and it makes me sad that people feel the need to thank me, because all I'm doing is looking at a situation without any bias, no skin in the game. I'm not Jewish. I'm not from Israel. I'm not married to nothing, zero connection, zero. All I'm doing is looking at a situation, looking at as many facts as I can find, and telling you what I think about it. And that's it. And what I think about it is what I think about it. And in my mind, it's the truth. I'm saying the truth. So the fact that that needs to be thanked, or that people need to be grateful, makes me incredibly sad. You get the idiots online, absolutely. And I've got a 6-year-old daughter, so I get threats all the time that scare me. Absolutely. I've had to have police protection. I've had to give my daughter to her father. But when I lay awake at night wondering, is it worth it? Am I endangering her? I think about the kind of world that will exist if I don't do this, and if other
Exactly
people
right.
don't do what I'm doing. And the reason I fight so hard and I stand up so strongly against what I see as terror and evil and people who only want death is because I want her to grow up in a world that values life. So when I worry about her safety now, I'm far more worried about it down the track, if people like me, like you, if other people don't stand up and fight for the kind of world that everyone deserves.
Perfectly stated. I think I just found those short clips that you have to share just to make the thing go viral. I think I found that it's around the 30-minute mark. There you go. Let's make it go viral.
You've got
Where
great taste.
where does so let's say we had the woke meter, or, as to use my term, parasitic
Yeah.
continuum. So, Canada is an utter disaster, so let's put it at the extreme. I mean, it's kind of trying to now outdo some of the traditionally woke countries, Sweden and so on. But certainly with Justin Trudeau, we've perhaps even exceeded the most woke of European countries. United States is turning a bit more woke, although of course now with Trump winning, there'll be an autocorrection. Where does Australia fit in that woke meter?
It's a great question. I talk about this analogy when I talk about the perception of a country in Canada. You're right. I look at that country at the moment and I just think, what a disgrace. Yet I know that most people in Canada probably are not representative
Right.
of that which gets most of the attention. I think it's the same thing in Australia. We have a very loud minority, a very, very loud minority. And I talk about the fact that for things like wokeness or evil or things that hurt us, regardless of how severe they are on the scale, it needs three things to survive and thrive, and that's weak leadership, silent majorities, and useful idiots. And we've got a lot of useful idiots. Like there's a lot of people around the world, but what drowns them out is the silent majority being less silent. And that's where I think we've gotten to, where we need to make a decision as a people. Do we want these people to get all the airtime on the news every night? Do we want our kids looking at a saturated environment where they think that is normal, or that is caring, or that is this, or that is that? Or do the silent majority who actually stand for what is good and right in this world actually want to decide at some point to speak up and to take up the space that's been taken up by them? So we're very woke when it comes to a very loud minority. But the mainstream Australian, and I get reassured of this all the time, I think is against all of that. They are kind, they're caring, they're inclusive. You know, I've got a gay brother. I'm socially progressive. But it's gone to a stage where it has gone so far that all it is doing is hurting us in so many ways. So we're woke with the minority, but I think the majority is not, like most places. I look at car racing. So when I was a sports host, I would cover 7 or 8 hours of car racing. And in my 1 minute 10 package on the news, the 6 p.m. news each night at 6:42, it would go to air, my 1 minute 20 package on the Bathurst car racing. What would I show in that 1 minute 20? Crashes. That was it. I had 1 minute 20 to fit 6-7 hours in. And the most interesting, the most stimulating, the most ratings-driven content was the car crashes. So someone might have driven 800 perfect laps. That might get a say at the end in a little after note. Oh, and blah, blah, won. He was good. But look at Barry and Gary and Darry, who all crashed. Oh, it's amazing. You know, it's exciting. It's dangerous. It's this, it's that. And I see mainstream media in particular do that all the time, not just with sport, but with everything. So we might have a day of peace and beauty and fulfilling heart. And then one idiot gets a sign or goes and harasses someone, and they make up the majority of the news. So you could watch it and think, my God, but the majority is not like that, thank goodness.
Right. I was trying to think before we began our conversation how many Australians I've had on the show. And forgive me if to anyone that I might forget, but off the top of my head, I can think of 2 people, one of whom is your colleague at Sky News Australia. Do you know who I'm talking about? A female.
Oh, I don't. I have many colleagues, but I don't know which. Can I guess?
Yes,
Only
go.
because I saw the other day that she'd retweeted one of your tweets. And so I thought, I wonder if she knows him. Rita?
Yes.
I love that. Yes. Actually, yes, you and Rita would get along incredibly well.
So she's been on my show once, and she was kind enough to invite me on hers a few times. The other Australian, I really wonder if you would know him. Do you know a lot of the Australian filmmakers? I don't know how famous he is, but I had him on. Before I even tell you his name, he's a gay filmmaker. Would that help you guess who it might be? He's a
Can
gay.
I be honest?
No?
I am worst. So I think the last movie I saw was Mr. Bean's Holiday.
Oh,
I listened to Billy Joel, Rod Stewart, and Meatloaf. I am the least cool person when it comes to pop culture, anything new, anything modern. So it's not, what I'm trying to say is he should not be offended that I will probably have no idea who you're talking about.
Okay, so I'm going to say it, but to your point, you mentioned Billy Joel, Rod Stewart, and Meatloaf, and I'm going to use, I think you'll understand the reference, 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Ain't bad.
And you know who's the one that I wouldn't include on that list? Mr. Billy Joel. Rod Stewart, legendary. Meatloaf, certainly some of his songs are incredible, and certainly 2 out of 3. Billy Joel will have to have a separate private conversation about your love of Billy Joel, because that does
What
not.
about Catholic girls stop much too late, but
The
that
honey
never.
badger of Australia should not be admitting publicly that she's into Billy Joel. But okay, so but
Yeah,
here's the filmmaker.
everything.
Let me tell you the story. So
Yeah.
my wife unfortunately sleeps very, very early. It's a miracle if she could be awake past 8:30 at night. And so pretty much after 8:30 at night, I'm on my own. And so one of those lonely nights, I'm flipping and I find a movie, an Australian movie. Now, I'm telling the story of how I hooked up with that film director.
Yes.
And the movie is called Cut Snake. Have you heard that? Have you heard that name?
Yes, I have.
Have
Yes.
you seen it?
No, of course not.
Oh, it's fantastic. And so
Yeah.
I watched this movie. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And so I just decide I'm going to, and this is probably 8, 9 years ago, I'm just going to reach out to the guy, who, the filmmaker, and have him on the show. So he's the other Australian. His name is Tony Ayres, Ayres. Is he at all? Is he a
The
household
name
name?
is very familiar. Look, I thought you might have been going to say Russell Crowe, but no,
Oh,
Tony Ayres. He's close. He's
the-
close. I'm going to look him up now. If you have an interest in him, then he must be pretty special. So I'm going to look him
oh,
up.
you're very sweet. Well, but I'm glad you said Russell Crowe, because I have here, I prepared a list before we came on. What is going on with Australia? Some of these I didn't even know were Australian. Most of them I did. Hugh Jackman, Guy
Yes.
Pearce, whom I love as an actor, but I found out he's a bit on the wokester side. That kind of pissed me off. But I really do love him. For example, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, one of my
Brilliant.
favorite movies of all time.
Wow,
Jeffrey.
that surprises me. I would never have picked that.
Oh,
Yes.
see, I'm socially liberal too, Madame Honeybadger.
Wow.
Yeah. So Jeffrey Rush, Nicole
Yes.
Kidman, but let me tell you when I don't like Nicole Kidman of now. Nicole Kidman of 1992, Flirting. Have you ever seen that movie?
No, of course I haven't. I need to.
Put it
Wait,
on the
you were
list.
going to say she was flirting with you.
No, she wasn't. I've never met her. Of course, if she met me, she'd flirt with me because it's just
It's like
natural to fall under the
human.
sway of the Lebanese lover. Exactly. But no, I haven't met her. Mel Gibson, we know he's Australian. Tony
Yeah.
Collette, Russell Crowe, and here's one that I only recently found out. I was surprised that she could carry such an American accent. Sarah Snook.
Yes, isn't
From
she amazing?
He's a mate. So what is going on that small country in terms of population, not in terms of, size? How are you guys generating so many top artists? What's going on?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's I think you look at, and look, we steal some of them. Russell Crowe was born in New Zealand, but
True.
whatever. We only kind of
But
steal
New
the
Zealand's
ones.
not a real country, right?
No, of course not. No, it's like a
Exactly.
little island. No, I adore New Zealand. The Prime Minister is a good friend of mine. Hello, you are wonderful people. I think it's, I think it's this passion and this drive that we have, and this overcoming the odds mentality. I mean, you talked about the kind of animals that we face day to day in this country. Like, I can't walk to the mailbox without a kangaroo trying to kill me. It's intense. So when you learn to survive in this jungle that is Australia, when you go to somewhere like Hollywood, you're like, oh God, is this it? Oh, agents. Oh no, that's nothing. I've got this. So I think we have this mentality where nothing is ever too hard and we try. And I'm not a Hollywood superstar by any stretch of the imagination, but even from my first ever job in TV, I went to an audition. I was hopeless. I was so bad. I had to read an auto cue. I was 20 years old. I left knowing that I was horrific. But once a week for 6 months, I sent an email to the boss of that community TV station and said, I know that I was awful, but please give me a shot. Please give me a shot. No reply for 6 months. It was almost 6 months to the day he rang me and he said, if I give you a 2-minute segment on the food show, will you leave me the fuck alone? And I went, absolutely. And that was my first taste of not being particularly talented, but just annoying the shit out of someone until they gave me a shot. And I think that's a kind of mentality that we have in Australia. And same as, being smaller and less powerful than a lot of other countries. But gosh, in different conflicts, when we would go to war with our allies, we more than carried our weight and then
Right.
some. I think we're a country that punches above our weight in many
Right.
ways. Russell Crowe's actually, he's a good friend of mine, and we've played tennis a few times. Myself and another friend of mine play against him and his girlfriend, Britt. And I tell you what, If you think he's competitive in the film space, you watch him play tennis. Crazy. Does
Really?
not like to lose. I'll put it that way.
Wow. All right. I know I'm looking at the time because I know that you have a flight or trip coming, so we only have about 2 or 3 minutes. This is a question that's become part of sort of the setup here on the show. And it stems from the fact that when I wrote my last book, I wrote a book on happiness. Towards the end of the book, I talk about, how to hopefully live a life where when you look back, you don't face many regrets. And so the regret question has become a staple of the show. So let me set it up for you. So there are two types of regret that most people think about. They think about regret due to action. So I regret that my marriage ended because I cheated on my wife. So I did something and that caused regret, versus regret due to inaction. I regret that I never became an architect and decided to go in the military because my dad was pushing me to go into the military, right? Now, it turns out, Erin, that over the long run, when you ask people to look back at their lives, the most looming regret is one of inaction. So you're still a young woman, so you have a lot more life to live. But if I were to ask you today, what is your greatest source of regret? Would you be kind enough to share it with us?
Absolutely. I don't think I've ever really been asked this question. I was thinking about it. I know that you do ask this at the end, and I think it definitely falls into that inaction space. And it's, if my father ever heard me say something like this, or if I had heard myself say 2 years ago, say something like this, I would have said, you are absolutely kidding. I'm a 41-year-old single mother who did therapy for the first time last year. I actually sat down with the most incredible psychologist, and my dad was a major general in the army. He was a blokey bloke, 6'6", this warrior. I'd say, "Love you, Dad." He'd be like, "Goodbye, Erin." We don't talk about feelings. We were never a family that ever talked about feelings, mental health, whatever. But last year I gave, when Dad was dying, he looked at me and he kept me in the room. My siblings had all left, and he said, and I thought he was going to say, "You're my favorite, you're my hero." And he said, "You look awful." And I kind of went, wow, like, for starters, I'm losing the most important person in my life, so I'm not going to look that crash hot. But I actually then started to think about what he meant, and I was so miserable in so many ways. I had no peace in my life. I was constantly anxious. I was on edge. I just was this chaotic mess. I'd never spoken about things that had happened to me. I'd never healed, and I never thought I'd be someone who would use the word healed. I'd never done any of that. As I left the room, my siblings and mum were waiting outside, and they're like, "What did he say?" And I said, "Well, he told me I look awful, and I'm the hot one, so you guys are screwed. In you go." But what I thought my gift to my dad would be was to do some therapy, because he was right. When I smiled, it wasn't genuine. There was nothing genuinely happy about me. I had this facade of happiness and joy. And so I did therapy, and it changed everything about my life. And I don't
Wow.
do it. I gave it 1 year, and I now text my psychologist if I'm having an off day. But it changed my existence. And even as a mother, I thought, been an incredible mother. I love my daughter more than life itself. But I look back at the first 4 or 5 years of her life, and I was there, but I was never present because my mind was so conflicted and chaotic and traumatized. And so my one regret is that I didn't do it 20 years ago.
Wow.
But it's also brought me here. It's also brought me to this place now where what I used to think was happiness is not even close. So my ability to appreciate this newfound peace, even in the midst of lots of chaos, I learned how to be okay with peace. And beforehand, I wasn't. And I saw this thing, people go to therapy to learn how to deal with hard times. No, my life has been full of hard times. I am the greatest dealer of hard times in the history of the world. You name it, people would say, "Badge of honor, you cope, you get back up, you do it." What I couldn't do was live with peace. And when I would find peace, I would create chaos because I didn't know how to live with peace. Now, I worked really hard, and it was brutal, and she was bloody brutal, called me out. She was awful, but she taught me how to live with peace. So my one regret would be
Wow.
that I didn't do it earlier, but I think in some ways it's also given me the greatest appreciation and gratitude for the fact that I've done it now. So as a final message, anyone, even if you don't feel like you have problems, seeing someone could be the greatest gift you ever give, not just yourself, but your children and the people you love. And yeah, that's what I would leave you with.
Wow, I mean, I wish we had more time because there's so much follow-up I could hit you with. What an incredibly honest and refreshing answer. Thank you so much. Stay on the line so we could say goodbye offline. Please come back anytime you want, and hopefully we'll see each other in Australia really soon. Thank you so much, Erin.
I can't wait. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to join you, and thank you for the incredible work that you do. And if I could just finish by saying, people often stop me and say, particularly men, and say, I would love my daughter or my child to feel the way about me that you feel about your dad. That is my hope. I'm so inspired by that. I look at you speak about him, and that's what I want. And I know, having seen so much of your work, that your daughter and your children would think exactly the same way.
Oh,
And
thank
you
you.
should be immensely proud, because as
Wow.
they get older, they understand how hard it is and how much it matters. And you should just feel incredibly proud, because I know they would.
Wow. I'm speechless. Thank you so much, Erin. Talk to you soon. Stay on the line.
Yes.